Good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey again, sporting a new look. Got rid of the beard. Candy doesn't care. She doesn't care whether I have a beard, a mustache, whether my head's shaved or not. She's always around because she wants her treat. As soon as I say the word, she starts going into her little routine. Shake a paw, lay down, speak. Oh, a good one. All right. Yeah. So there it is, or there it was. That's what used to be on my face, some of it. Today is April 30th, 2024. It's right now 11:33 p.m. Eastern time. And I don't know if it shows up on here, but I do have a bit of razor burn from having some over here and on my lip from having hacked off the beard. Anyway, I wanted to talk tonight about something different, something that might surprise anyone who's watched this channel regularly and listened to my opinions, thoughts, views regularly. Before I really get going, thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Thank you for the thumbs up. And this miserable, pathetic little YouTube station, an old guy just shaking his fist at the cloud, although I think I look younger now. The Townhouse Gardener is back. I think you might like today's, what I'm going to be talking about today, Townhouse, because I know that our opinions vis-a-vis Israel are not always, are quite often diametrically opposed. But what I appreciate is the fact that even though we disagree, we don't have to be disagreeable. But I titled this something to the effect of, and Townhouse Gardener says, I think so. Yeah, we approach Israel from two different sides. But I titled this something to the effect of, was October 7th a false flag? And before I get into that, I think it's important to understand what a false flag is, because it can take different forms. A naval ship can fly under a false flag. So if you have Britain and France at war, the British can send one of their warships into a French port, flying the French flag, and then start attacking the French. That would be one form of a false flag. Another form of a false flag attack, and this is probably more common, was during World War II when the Germans invaded Poland. What was the justification that was given for Germany's invasion of Poland? The reason Germany went into Poland is they wanted Lebensraum, or however you pronounce that, elbow room. They wanted room to expand. But that's hardly justification for invading a sovereign nation state. So what Germany did was German soldiers put on Polish uniforms, and then these German soldiers dressed as Polish soldiers attacked a German radio station. And that was the provocation, so that Germany could turn to its population, turn to the German population and say, you know, we were attacked and now we are defending ourselves. So that's another form of a false flag. What happened on October 7th, and this is my genuine opinion, is that I do believe it was Hamas attacking Israel from the Gaza Strip. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But the question I have is, did the Israelis, their intelligence, their security, their military apparatus, did they have foreknowledge of this attack? And there is compelling evidence that they did have foreknowledge. The New York Times published a piece some time ago. It was further reported even in the Times of Israel that they received a report called an operation that was being planned by Hamas called the Jericho Wall. Randy Kinder is saying yes, it was. Townhouse Gardener is saying yes, it was. So did Israel know the attack was coming? There is compelling evidence, and it's enough for me to believe that yes, Israel knew the attack was coming. I liken it somewhat to it locksteps pretty closely with my opinions with what happened on 9/11, 2001 in the United States of America, with the hijacking of at least 4 planes, 2 of which crashed into or at least we believe they crashed into the Twin Towers. One we believe or are told crashed into the Pentagon, and another created a big hole in the ground in Pennsylvania. And frankly, I don't think that operation went off completely as planned. I think they probably more than 50%, more than half of what they were intending to have happened. I mean, we all saw what happened with Building 7, which wasn't even hit by an airplane, just imploding perfectly on its own footprint. And many have suggested that it was a planned demolition, that they would have pored over the blueprints of that building beforehand, found out where the key structural supports were, planted explosives in it, and goodness knows, I don't think the intention originally was to have it, say that a fire caused this building to just implode perfectly on itself. What the U.S. wanted to do in 9/11. Prior to 9/11, they were talking about the need to go into countries like Afghanistan and Iraq and to install regimes, governments that would be friendly to Western interests. And I don't think the goals are exactly the same, obviously, with Israel and Hamas. But here's what I think, might call it a working thesis, if you will, as to what happened on October 7th, is that Israel knew an impending attack was being planned. And rather than thwarting it, which I believe would have been perhaps not easy, but incredible, I'm going to use that word, it would have been easy for Israel to thwart the attack. But rather than thwarting the attack, they allowed it to go forward and may have even stood down some of their defense mechanisms to ensure that the attack had an impact. The one thing I want to make clear, both 9/11 and October 7th, the United States has enemies who would like to see it taken down, like to see it destroyed. And likewise, there are forces that want to see Israel destroyed. The issue I have is that in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, and I'd be interested in your take, Townhouse Gardener in particular, and Randy Kinder, if you as well share Townhouse Gardener's what I'll call worldview, is after 9/11, I didn't see anyone promoting this idea that Israel, or rather the United States, should be erased, that it should be, wiped off the map. Because a lot of people recognized that and speculated on complicity within the George W. Bush White House and among the security and intelligence apparatus of the United States of America, that there had been complicity in allowing these attacks to take place, all kinds of things. The fact that it was standard operating procedure for when a plane lost contact with air traffic control, that fighter jets would be scrambled almost immediately. Within 15, 20 minutes, there should have been F-14s, F-16s flying alongside these aircraft. And yet that didn't happen. What we constantly were being told is, well, it was an intelligence failure or an operational failure. It's just failure after failure after failure, just a long list of failures that, Osama bin Laden in a cave in Afghanistan, that he got incredibly lucky in planning out this event, was able to circumvent the world's security and intelligence apparatuses, was able to hijack these planes, and the U.S. just kept making mistake after mistake after mistake, and operational errors made that allowed everything to go off. But no one, after it all went down, no one, I don't recall hearing anyone ever say that America should be wiped out from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the ocean to the ocean, that the United States should be wiped off the map. But after October 7th, we certainly have people who are advocating that Israel is an illegal nation, that they're occupying stolen land and all this malarkey that doesn't bear up to historical fact. I was just reading something from a pro-Israeli supporter that said Israel as a nation state was created in 1948 by the United Nations, which is not true. The United Nations tried, but their proposal was never implemented. They voted on a proposal to create a national homeland for the Jewish people in what was still at that time, it was still British mandated Palestine. And Palestine as a political entity, as a territory, existed for 27, 28 years, from 1920 until 1947. 1948. From sometime in 1920, the mandate was created, and it ended on May 15th, 1948. That's the only time in history that there's been a political entity called Palestine, or the Mandate of Palestine. Got to read some comments. Johnny Appleseed, did Neil Armstrong walk on the moon? I'm not going to get into the moonwalk. Or whatever you want to call it, Stanley Kubrick's uncredited masterpiece, and it would have been. It would be a masterpiece. Townhouse Gardener says no. So we have a lot of people who doubt the moon landing. I'm among them. But leaving that aside, I want to talk about Israel and what happened on October 7th. I consider it almost a slam dunk that the Israelis, their intelligence services like Mossad, that they have operatives, moles, if you will, who are operating within Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. Agents and double agents are de rigueur, that's standard operating procedure in the intelligence world, in the world of intel. You try and infiltrate your enemy and then gain both inside information, and depending upon how senior your operatives are, you can possibly even direct things. And just reading on. Johnny Appleseed says 6 times on the moon, faked every time, is very unlikely, I must add. Everyone wants to seem to talk about the moon landing, something that happened in the 60s and 70s, 50 odd years ago. I'm frankly more interested in what's going on right now in Israel, because the biggest bone of contention I have is that I'm willing to allow, absolutely, that the U.S., I'm mixing the two up now, they are joined at the hip, but that the U.S. on 9/11, that they had foreknowledge of what was going on. It's been widely speculated by many people that Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset, and that's, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. But at the same time, then you have people making a leap that if the United States has operatives inside of organizations like Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or whatever, they have operatives in there, and then it's taken to another step, and it said, well, then the U.S. created them, and the same with Israel. There are people who claim that Israel created Hamas, which I do not believe is true. Israel did not create Hamas. Hamas came into being sometime in and around 1988. And I do believe that the Israelis, that they built Hamas up to serve as a counterbalancing force to go up against the PLO, because of the old adage that a house divided against itself cannot stand. So better to have the Palestinians, for lack of a better word, the Philistines, that's where it comes from, to have the Palestinians fighting amongst each other for control and power and authority than to have a house divided. They can't, then it'll diminish their capacity to attack Israel. And I also think it's very likely and pretty much a slam dunk that there are operatives within Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, who are beholden or who are owned by Israeli security service, Israeli intelligence. I'm talking about Mossad. That they're probably the world's most capable intelligence outfit in the world. It's believed that they had a big hand in Israel obtaining enriched uranium for a nuclear program that Israel to this day denies. They make no assertions. They make no, they don't claim to be a nuclear power, although basically everyone in the world knows that they are. I think it would be the biggest shock if we were to find out that Israel actually doesn't have atomic weapons and that it was all just a facade to make them look strong. It would be brilliant if that were the case. Having everyone think you have a nuclear bomb when you don't is almost as effective as actually having one. I'm going to read on. Townhouse Gardener says, let's talk about Israel. Johnny Appleseed asks if there's an asteroid that's going to hit us next week. That asteroid, I actually haven't heard about that. I haven't heard about an asteroid. There's always something coming at us. But what's happening right now in terms of Israel is that the Israelis now, they're in peace talks with Hamas being brokered by the Egyptians. Most of the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip has been pushed into the southern city of Rafah and that area. And Israel seems hell-bent on attacking and trying to dismantle, I think it's 2 or 3 remaining battalions of Hamas and wiping them out. Oh, like Saddam. Townhouse Gardener brings up Saddam Hussein, accused of having nukes. I don't remember it being nukes. That was a possibility. It was just this famous weapons of mass destruction, WMD. That was the lie that was used to sell that war, the second Persian Gulf War, when George W. Bush was president, 2003, 2004, sometime around there. Might have been 2005. Bush was president from 2000 to 2008. So sometime during it was probably 2004, 2005, actually, I think. Doesn't matter. Over 20 years ago in any case. And the biggest war is all about deception. War, that's Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I've talked about it many times on this channel. Deception is the key to victory in warfare. And when you're weak, you want to appear strong. When you're strong, you want to appear weak. And my support for Israel is unwavering. But I've never said much positive one way or another on Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi. I don't talk about him much. But my opinion is tilting heavily negative as it was against George W. Bush during that era. It strikes me that the situations are eerily similar. But there are what's going to happen in the days and weeks ahead is anybody's guess. But I do think we are still going to see, I've been saying it for a while, this is going to blow up. I think it's planned. the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, whatever. I think this is all part and parcel of it. And there's going to be an escalation in the Middle East. And Johnny Appleseed writes he did not face nuclear war, back in the Bush era. That was, I remember that war. I mean, just go off on a side tangent for a little bit. When the first Persian Gulf War was sometime in and around 1990, when George H.W. Bush was president, father to George W. Bush. Right after Reagan. Reagan was 80 to 88. George H.W. Bush was 88 to 92. Johnny Appleseed says that what he meant was that Sun Tzu did not face nuclear war. No, he didn't. But nuclear war, it's the weapon you cannot use. It's only been used twice in actual warfare, and that was when the Americans dropped bombs on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, which led to the Japanese formally surrendering to the United States and her allies, gave us VJ Day, victory over Japan. But I'm going all over the place right now. Getting back to that first Gulf War, Iraq had invaded Kuwait. There were a number of reasons why Iraq is said to have invaded Kuwait. One, there was claims of slant drilling into Iraqi oil fields. There was also an insult, a reported insult by the emir, the king of Kuwait, against Saddam, saying, there was bellicose words, saber rattling, and the Kuwaiti emir said something to the effect of, "I'll make your wives part of my harem." A very Middle Eastern Arab type insult, and that this was the provocation. It was further suggested that Saddam Hussein, who was a close ally of the United States and had sat down to dinner, I've seen pictures of him sitting down to dinner with George H.W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, breaking bread together. And the U.S. had supplied Iraq during its 7-8 year long war with neighboring Iran. Iran had been backed by the Russians. And so when the United States decided to go in and liberate Kuwait, they said, "We're fighting for democracy." And then sharp people realized, well, wait a minute, Kuwait isn't a democracy. It's a kingdom. It's an emirate state. It's not a democracy. So then they said, okay, fair enough. We're fighting because we're going in to liberate them because Saddam Hussein represents a major threat to world peace and security. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Saddam Hussein and his Republican Guard fought a 7-8 year long war with a regional power, Iran, and they couldn't even beat them. It was a stalemate. It's not even a threat to the entire Middle East, let alone the world. And then they came up with this story, and you can look into it. They got a member of the Kuwaiti royal family, a girl, 12, 13 years old, to address a joint session of Congress. And she claimed that Iraq soldiers were going into hospitals and throwing babies out of incubators, which is classic atrocity propaganda, but it worked. And that got international support for the war as well as U.S. domestic support. American people were all in now. They're throwing babies out of incubators, which was never verified, and everyone, pretty much any reputable source will tell you it was a crock. It was just atrocity propaganda used to sell the war. It was the invention of a public relations firm hired by the George H.W. Bush administration. Johnny Appleseed says Iraq fought over water, perhaps. I viewed that as a proxy war. That was a war between Iran and Iraq, but it was a way for the United States and Russia to fight each other without going at each other directly. It's kind of the way Iran chooses to operate now. Iran, rather than going at Israel directly, Iran funds, finances, trains groups like Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis down in Yemen, and they use them they're the puppet master, and these are their puppets, and they have their puppets attack Israel. And unfortunately, I've always viewed, going back 20, 30, 40 years, well, maybe not 40, but 20, 30 years, I've always viewed this situation that we're seeing unfold with Israel going to war with the greater Islamic Arab world as being an unavoidable inevitability. It had to happen because for the Arab nations, for the Islamic nations in the Middle East, they still haven't gotten over the humiliating and catastrophic defeat they suffered during the first Arab-Israeli War from 1948 to 1949. They attacked a one-day-old country that had just made a unilateral declaration, five nations, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, 5 against 1, 30 million population in the 5 invading countries. The Jews were only 800,000, men, women, and children. Should have been a walk in the park by any reasonable expectations. The U.S. didn't send forces to assist Israel. The Brits didn't. The Jews were fighting on their own, and they managed to establish themselves as a nation. And for the Arab world, they consider that a catastrophe, and it was. You go 5 against 1. I've said it before. It's like an NBA team losing to a high school team. Actually, it's more like an NBA team losing to a middle school team. 5 against 1. Johnny Appleseed says abortion similar, way off topic. Yes, I'm not afraid to touch abortion. Johnny Appleseed says that 48 was existential for the new Israelis. Israel, for the first time in 2,000 years, about 2,000 years, there was a Jewish national homeland, again, for the first time since AD 70. At that time, back in AD 70, there was a Jewish national homeland, but it wasn't ruled by the Jews themselves, by the Israelis. It was ruled by the Romans. And they have a long history of being ruled by the Babylonians, by the Persians, by the Greeks, by everybody, later on by the Ottomans. I mean, I realized at the time that the Ottomans were ruling it, that it was predominantly Islamic, but there were still Jews living there. There have always been Jews living in the land of Israel. But I find it I still find it very disconcerting, the amount of hatred toward all things Jewish. Still bothers me, still rankles me. And something interesting that I've only just learned is that the student protests that are taking place at Yale, at Columbia is the big one. We have them now in Canada. McGill has a large protest taking place. And the New York Times, New York Post, and very numerous outfits have now come out with reporting showing that these protests are being funded by the Rockefellers and by George Soros. Everyone's, are you a fan? If you're a fan of George Soros and a fan of the Rockefeller Foundation, well, then, when you're siding with the student protesters who, want to see Israel wiped out from the river to the sea, everyone loves that slogan. Well, who follow the money? Who's paying the individuals to organize these protests? The Rockefellers and George Soros. And that's a bit of an inconvenient reality check, I think, for a lot in the so-called, what we tend to call the freedom movement. You want to be on side with the Rockefellers and Soros types of the world. Now, there is the point to be made that it's almost like a wrestling match. It's almost like the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, where everything is scripted out. And could it be that the Rockefellers and the Soroses are funding these groups to just foment dissension and to get you and I, Joe Public, fighting with each other over this whole notion of Israel and the Palestinians? Entirely possible. And anything's possible. Johnny Appleseed asked the question, envy. I don't know what you mean by that. Are you suggesting that because Jews are overwhelming, the degree of success that Jews have in the world is disproportionate to their size in the world? The Jewish population globally is said to be in and around 15 million total. And, the Muslim population, by contrast, is said to number somewhere close to 2 billion. I think it's 1.9 something billion. So call it 2 billion, 15 million. And yet, if you look at the Jewish presence in the scientific fields, medical fields, in Hollywood, in finance, in so many endeavors, Jews succeed far and are far more represented than what a global population of 15 million would suggest is reasonable. And it's what leads into this whole idea of the Jews control the world. I don't buy into this notion that the Jews control the world. Now, the Rothschilds and other, prominent individuals, are they engaged in nefarious things? Yeah, I will acknowledge that. I believe that's 100% true. However, there are Christians, there are Muslims, there are atheists, there are Satanists as well, and they work together. Johnny Appleseed says, oy vey. Oy vey. So that's about as much as I wanted to say on this topic tonight. Gone on for just over half an hour. Originally, I had been planning to talk about the bird flu, and there was more reporting on it that I read today about Public Health Agency of Canada saying that this nation, Canada, that we're not doing enough surveillance of bird flu to know if our dairy cattle are infected. And there's this whole talk of them stockpiling a vaccine ahead of the declaration of a bird flu pandemic. And I wonder if they're softening the ground to get us prepared to accept or to believe that there is a bird flu pandemic. I think the ground was softened ahead of COVID to expect us to see a global pandemic. And so when it came, we kind of went, well, we were told. And I'm wondering, are they softening the ground now so that if at a time when a bird flu pandemic is declared, people go, well, they were it was inevitable. But they're talking now about having a vaccine stockpiled in advance so that if bird flu mutates to become highly transmissible and with the ability to affect humans, that they'll have a vaccine ready ahead of time, which blows my mind, because how can you prepare a vaccine for a variant of a virus that doesn't even exist yet? And we've seen the crappy COVID shots. They were done at so-called warp speed. They had those shots ready to go. They knew exactly what they would do. They're doing what they were intended to do. I actually think there's a possibility that they're not working as well as they intended, that there aren't as many side effects and as many heart damage and as many turbo cancers as they thought would be. I think it may be that they are not working as well as they had originally wanted them to, but they are working. They are doing what they intended. Autoimmune conditions. Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers, a former MVP in the NHL, has just said that he has Bell's palsy. Austin Matthews, assistant captain and 69 goals scoring forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs, has said that he has some condition that's causing him when he exerts himself too much. He's having all kinds of issues, and you just have to wonder, is this part and parcel of it? I think it is. And I think over, I remember reading that, with ADE, antibody dependency enhancement, that over the ensuing 5 years from 2021 to 2026, that we're going to see an explosion in everything we're seeing an explosion in. And I think it's just going to keep snowballing, and it's going to keep getting worse. Eventually, in answer to Johnny Appleseed's question, intended to get rid of us, eliminate us, to fulfill goal number 1 on the old Georgia Guidestones. Yeah. And if you don't know what the Georgia Guidestones are, anyone watching this, very easy to find out. Georgia Guidestones. Look at the number 1 guiding principle. Townhouse Gardener says his mom got cancer after the booster. I don't want to tread over John Campbell. Anyone interested in that topic, sign on to Dr. John Campbell's YouTube channel. He's very good at keeping things between the lines so that his videos don't get taken down. And watch what he's having to say. Hearing now that they're saying that turbo cancer, this term turbo cancer, is an invention of the anti-vax movement. My ass. Oh, Townhouse Gardener says her mom. So I misgendered Townhouse Gardener. I thought Townhouse Gardener was male, but female. Those are the only 2 choices. And Johnny Appleseed feels sorry for Townhouse Gardener's mom. We all do. I've lost both my parents, and it's a rough time, and both to cancer. We live in a toxic world. I think cancer is, call it that old Dire Straits song, industrial disease. We're all designed. It's by design. Crazy world we're living in. Crazy world. But anyway, I've rambled on long enough. That's enough for tonight. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the 4 thumbs up I've gotten already. And we'll see what happens in the next couple nights. If you want to subscribe, hopefully I can come up with a couple more jokes. I had a couple the other night. Going to try and be well. You all be well as well. Johnny Appleseed, Townhouse Gardener. And there was also Randy Kinder, or Kinder, but I'm guessing it's Kinder. Anyway, God bless everyone, and I'll talk to you later.